Hey guys, James here with another video. Today we're talking about Cult X by Fuminori Nakamura. This is a tricky one to review. A lot of people on Goodreads and stuff had trouble with reviewing this one, and I'm no real exception because this book doesn't I guess it doesn't function like a regular book that I would review on this channel. And that's not to say it's not a book. It obviously has pages with words on it. That part, is easy to get your head around. What's immediately sort of stumbling about this book is that it doesn't have like a strong plot, but that doesn't take away from its effectiveness as a book. And I'll explain more about that later on. So you're probably wondering, what is Cult X about other than a cult? Well, it's not about the fiery demons and stuff. I'm not sure why that was chosen for the cover. But Cult X is basically a novel about this guy called Narazaki who his girlfriend or his lover goes missing, and he tries to track her down and discovers that she's involved with this cult known as Cult X, because they're not like a named group, I guess. But to say that that's what the book is about does it a disservice, and that's where that disconnect between it being a story and being more about presentation of ideas comes in. So almost immediately you start sort of falling over these little stumbling blocks, and it kind of sets you up for this in the prologue. Like, there's a character who lampshades it a bit by saying, if this was a novel, I would be that character who shows up to get the plot going and never shows up again. And that's like exactly what he is. But then it's hard to pin down a protagonist. You might think, based on that brief plot introduction, that Narazaki would be the protagonist, and for a while he kind of is, because we sort of learn things about the cult through his lens, but then sort of halfway through the book, because it's split into two parts, Narazaki fades more into the background and we focus on different characters that are more involved in the cult itself and stuff. And there's a bit of a disconnect between the first part of the book and the second half of the book. One of the other big things that people stumbled over is they said that it was really boring at the start, and I can see where people are coming from with that, because a large part of the beginning of the book, the first half, is broken up by these lectures by a guy called Matsuo. He is a cult leader, kind of, but he's not the sinister cult leader. He's not Cult X cult leader. He's just like this different cult leader. And he, like, basically it's long chapters of him just monologuing to his followers about his philosophy and his worldview and how he came to that point. And I can see why that would put some people off, because it does chop up the plot. If you're in it, like, what happened to Ryoko Tachibana, like the guy's ex-lover, like, you don't find out for a very long time, because the plot kind of stops and starts to introduce all these things. But here's why I don't think that's a bad thing, is because those talks and discussions, like, if you read them and you think about them and then you start understanding them, they set up a philosophy and a worldview that gets you to start thinking more critically about what you're experiencing throughout the book. And then in the second half, which is disconnected narratively in a lot of ways from the first part, those things start to make more sense. Like, if you keep in mind the philosophy and the lessons that you were sort of introduced to in the first part, you can start applying those as a framework for understanding the actions in the second part. So even though narratively speaking both halves are kind of separated, thematically and conceptually they are very linked together, which is very strong. And for a little while whilst reading the second half, I was a bit confused. I was like, where is this really going? What does this have to do with the stuff that I read 100 pages ago? But then as we get more and more towards the conclusion, those themes start to marry up more and you start to sort of get an understanding of it. And this book is really exploration of these characters and what kind of moral crisis they can go through that would lead someone to being involved in this sort of group. I read a review that compared it in some ways to Fight Club, and I can definitely see that. Like, it's thematically quite similar in that it's about these disenfranchised people that have been, for whatever reason, disconnected from society and the world at large, or in their minds anyway, or rejected in some way, and they have come to this sort of radical ideology as a way to find companionship and belonging. So in ways it's kind of similar to Fight Club like that. So if you enjoyed Fight Club, you might very well like this. It does get very talky in so much as there's not, as I say, there's not a lot of plot going on, but there's a lot of ideas presented, and I can definitely see why some people would find it a bit too blunt. Like, the information is very much told to you. This is tell, don't show, the book. But I found it really interesting just because I enjoyed reading the different perspectives and worldviews of the characters. But that is not to say this book is enjoyable in any way. This book is in fact quite repellent. I think deliberately so. When you're getting in the heads of these cult people, you see the world through their eyes, or you get told, like, this is how they see the world, and the way they behave and react to how they perceive the world is off-putting, to say the least. There are very strong content warnings given by me right now. There's a lot of sexual abuse, rape, violent, like extreme violence, sexual violence. It's very dark. Like, a lot of people now hold up "it's so dark" to be like it's like gritty and mature, and it is mostly mature in the way that it's handled, but it's presented to you through the lens of people that are quite immature in a way. Like, I don't know, it's hard to explain. Like, obviously rape is included in the story for a justifiable thematic reason, but the way it's presented is like, it's very uncomfortable because you're like feeling like, oh, like this character's really enjoying dominating, like sexually dominating these other people. So like the power play is very uncomfortable to read, but it's supposed to be. So I can't say, oh, it's a bad thing that the writer did this, because I don't think like the writer is some weird sexual sadist. I think he was just trying to portray an uncompromising vision of what someone who would become a sexual sadist, like dominating bastard, would be like, and how they perceive things. And you can see that in the two cult leaders. There's Sawatari, who's like the cult ex-cult leader, and there's Matsuo, who, like, they, in the narrative, they are linked, quite flimsily linked together. Like, from a story structure point of view, they're sort of okay, like, I guess they just know each other, like, fine. But thematically, they kind of work as counterpoints to each other's philosophy. Like, it's the way they experience similar things in their lives, but Matsuo reacts to it one way, Sawatari reacts to it in a different way, and you kind of see Sawatari as like a dark mirror in some ways to Matsuo, and I think that was done really well, and it was very interesting to read. Like, it was to see how two divergent philosophies can stem from the same set of stimulus. So that was really interesting, and it also has some themes outside of the personal moral sphere. It talks a lot about sort of government manipulation of emotions to forward an ideology for political ends and that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of interesting stuff contained in this book. It's a lot to chew on and think about. It's presented in a very visceral and, as I say, uncompromising way. So if that kind of presentation turns you off, if you don't want to get under the skin of some of the worst parts of the human existence, maybe don't give this one a go. But if you're into sort of very unabashedly disturbing literature, and you think that you're mature enough to handle that, and you're not going to be, if you think that you can deal with that and sort of process it in a way that it's not going to like destroy your existence or whatever. I'm not saying it's that powerful, but if you think that you can, if you're grown up enough to handle that kind of thing and you're fine with it, then definitely give it a go. It's an interesting read. I had I wouldn't say I had fun reading it, but it definitely had an interesting time with it. So let's talk about some of the feedback that the book cover wants to talk about. The Wall Street Journal says, pushes the boundaries of the thriller genre to an extreme. Don't know about that. I wouldn't really call it a thriller so much as more of a... I guess it's as much of a thriller in the same way Atlas Shrugged is a thriller. I mean, there's not really... There's a crime element because it's a weird cult, but it's not really a thriller. So I don't know about that one. Let's see, what else do we have? You'll think about Nakamura's questions long after you've closed this book's covers. If you feel a few frissons along the way, consider how easily you might be seduced into a cult and then take a long, cold shower. Yeah, I mean, I agree with the first part. You'll definitely think about this book. Like, it definitely got under my skin. It got in my head. And I was thinking about the philosophies presented a lot. I wouldn't say that it seduces you into joining a cult, because they're not presented in the best way. Like, they're not presented in a glowing light. It definitely gives you a better understanding of why certain people would join a cult. And I guess if you do find yourself agreeing with some of the philosophies of, especially of Sawatari and Cult X, then yeah, maybe have a long, hard look at yourself in the mirror. I don't know. Cult X, translated into handsome, unadorned English by Kalal Almani, pushes the boundaries of the... Okay, that's where the pushes the boundaries of the thriller quote comes from. A daunting, challenging saga of good and evil on a Dostoevskian scale. I haven't read any Dostoevsky, but he's mentioned a lot in this book. His name comes up. I don't know if that was just... I don't know if those allusions are correct or not, because I haven't read him, or if it was just an attempt by Nakamura to be like, you've heard of classical literature, think of my book like that. I don't know, maybe. Is it a daunting, challenging saga of good and evil? In a sense. I wouldn't say it's good and evil. I would say it's more extremism. It's more of an exploration of extremism rather than good and evil. Like, I don't think it's that easily split. There's definitely a worse cult, but yeah, it talked about the writing style there, and which something actually I didn't touch upon. It's obviously translated from Japanese. I find a lot with books that are translated from Japanese, and I don't know if this is just because of the way Japanese writing is structured, but I find it tends to use a lot more direct language and less flowery prose. It's much more straightforward and to the point in terms of its sentence structure and stuff like that. It's not huge run-on sentences with elaborate descriptions and stuff like that. I find that's a common thread throughout a lot of the Japanese literature that I've read. And I don't know if that's the work of the translator or if that's just a byproduct of the Japanese writing style. But it is quite straightforward to read. Nakamura's impassioned writing is part of a continuum that stretches from Dostoevsky to Camus to Oe. I don't know who Oe is. I assume he's another Japanese author. Camus, again, not read Camus, not read Dostoevsky. Got nothing really to say about that. The Fuminori Nakamura novel we've been waiting for explores the lives of those on the fringes of society, the damaged and the ostracized, the Japan times. Yes, it does all those things. That's a good descriptive review in a paragraph. If I was going to write a paragraph description of what this book is, that's basically it. So yeah, fine. Nakamura's talent for characterization and willingness to engage make this a novel worth wrestling with, the LA Review of Books. I don't know about the characterization part. A lot of the characters are kind of narrative devices in a lot of ways. The major characters are quite well fleshed out, like Sawatari, Matsuo. Like, you get a lot of in-depth discussion of their backstories and their motivations and stuff. But then there are other characters like Tachibana. Like, Tachibana is spends the first half of the story as a MacGuffin, and then you get to learn some more about her in the second part. But her characterization is always very tied to the male characters, so I wouldn't say he's a master of characterization. Like, not all of the characters come into their own, but for the major characters, like the ones the story really sort of revolves around, those ones are done pretty well, so I'd agree with that. So that's it for Cult X by Fuminori Nakamura. It's now available in English, so if you're not speak Japanese, maybe go check it out if you like what you heard from this, and if you didn't like what you heard from this, if it doesn't sound for you, then well, you know, don't read it. If you have read this book, let me know in the comments. Tell me, what did you think? Did you like it? Did you not like it? Did it gross you out? Did it put you off? And that's it for me. So I will see you in the next review, or whatever it is I upload next, and that's it. Bye for now.